Ethan Marlowe's hands didn't shake when he set the bucket down between himself and the Apache warrior woman. They'd shaken 4 years ago when he buried his wife and daughter. They'd shaken 2 years ago when he learned the truth about who really killed them. But today, standing 30 feet from the people everyone told him to hate, his hands were steady. Because he'd already lost everything worth protecting. And sometimes, when you have nothing left to lose, you finally find something worth giving. Before we go further into Ethan's story, hit that subscribe button and stay with us until the end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let's begin. None. The rope burned Ethan's palms as he hauled the bucket up from the well. Same rope he'd been meaning to replace for 3 months. Same thought every morning tomorrow. Tomorrow he'd ride into town for new rope. Tomorrow he'd fix the barn door. Tomorrow he'd care about things like that again. The bucket broke the surface. Water sloshed over the rim cold and clear. He set it on the stone edge of the well and straightened, pressing one hand to the small of his back. 43 years old, and he felt 60. The ranch spread out behind him in the early morning light. 2 horses in a corral built for 20. A barn with gaps between the boards wide enough to see daylight through. Fields he'd stopped planting 2 seasons back, because what was the point of growing corn when you had no one to feed but yourself? But the well still gave water. Clean, cold water that tasted like it came from somewhere deep and pure, untouched by everything ugly happening on the surface. He heard them before he saw them. Movement in the brush to the east, not the careful movement of deer or the scurrying of rabbits. Human movement. Desperate movement. Ethan's hand went to his hip. Found nothing. He'd sold his rifle 4 months ago to buy feed for the horses. The knife in his boot would have to do, though they both knew it wouldn't. 5 figures emerged from the tree line. He knew what they were immediately. Apache. 3 men, 2 women. All of them moving wrong. Injured. One of the men was being half-carried by the others, his feet dragging in the dirt. The woman at the front had blood soaked through the cloth wrapped around her left shoulder, but she walked with her spine straight, her eyes sweeping the property with the precision of someone who'd survived by seeing threats before they materialized. She stopped 30 feet from the well. The group stopped with her. Her gaze locked onto the bucket of water sitting on the stone rim. Then it moved to Ethan. Then back to the water. Nobody spoke. The sun climbed higher, burning the back of his neck. One of the warriors, younger than the others, maybe 19, had his hand resting on the knife at his belt. The tension in his jaw said he was in pain. They all were. Ethan could see it in how they held themselves, the slight tremor in their stances, the way they kept glancing at the well like it might vanish. The woman took 1 step forward. Just one. Her eyes never left his face. She was waiting for him to run, to reach for a weapon, to shout for help that wouldn't come, because there was no one within 5 miles of this place. Ethan had seen that look before. It was the look of someone who'd been betrayed so many times that trust had become a language she'd forgotten how to speak. He reached down slowly and picked up the bucket. The water rippled. 5 sets of eyes tracked the movement. The young warrior's hand tightened on his knife. Ethan took 3 steps toward them. Stopped. The woman raised her hand slightly, a small gesture, but the young warrior froze in place. She led. That was clear. Whatever happened next, she'd decide it. Ethan set the bucket down on the ground between them. Then he stepped back. His heart hammered in his chest so hard he could hear it in his ears, but his hands didn't shake. He'd made his choice. Whatever came next, he'd live with it. The woman stared at him. The moment stretched out like pulled wire. Behind her, one of the warriors said something in their language. It sounded like a warning. She didn't respond. Her eyes were still locked on his, searching for the trap, the trick, the betrayal that had to be coming. But Ethan just stood there, waiting. The water sat between them like a test neither of them knew how to pass. The silence broke when the wounded warrior collapsed. His legs gave out. The man supporting him, older gray in his hair, struggled to keep him upright. The sound of the wounded man's body hitting the dirt was like a stone dropping into still water. The woman's attention snapped to him for just a second. That second was enough. She made her decision. She moved toward the bucket. Not quickly. Every step was deliberate, her eyes flicking between Ethan and the water. When she reached it, she knelt down slowly. Her injured shoulder made the movement stiff. Her hand touched the rim. She lifted it. Drank. The water ran down her chin and she didn't bother wiping it away. Then she carried it back to the others. The young warrior grabbed it from her hands the moment she was close enough. He drank like a man drowning, then passed it to the older warrior beside him. That one drank more carefully, his weathered face showing nothing. The bucket moved between them until it reached the fallen man. They tilted his head up, poured water between his cracked lips. Some went in. Most didn't. Ethan watched from where he stood. He hadn't moved. The woman straightened and turned back to face him. The bucket was empty now. She held it in one hand, studying him with an intensity that made his skin prickle. "Why?" Her voice was rough, the words shaped awkwardly by a language that wasn't her first. Ethan didn't answer right away. The question had too many answers, and none of them would make sense to someone who'd spent years learning that survival meant never trusting your enemy. He looked past her at the injured warrior on the ground, at the way the others had positioned themselves around him protectively. "You needed it," he said finally. The young warrior said something sharp in their language. It sounded like an accusation. The woman raised her hand again, that same gesture. The young warrior fell silent, though his jaw clenched tight. She kept her eyes on Ethan. "Your people kill mine," she said. "Mine kill yours. You give water." "I give water," Ethan said. The simplicity of it seemed to confuse her more than reassure her. She glanced back at her group, then at the well, then at the ranch behind him. Calculating. Ethan could see the thoughts moving behind her eyes. This was a trap. Had to be. Men like him didn't just help. Not without wanting something. Not after everything that had happened between their peoples. But there were no other men. No rifles pointed from the windows. No horses saddled and ready to chase them down. Just one man with empty hands and a well that still had water in it. She took another step closer. Ethan's muscles tensed, but he didn't move. She was close enough now that he could see the pain lines around her eyes, the way she held her injured shoulder slightly forward to protect it. Close enough that if she wanted to kill him, she could. "The well," she said, gesturing toward it. "More water there." "Yes." "You let us take—" Ethan looked at the fallen warrior again. The man's breathing was shallow, his skin too pale. Whatever had happened to him, he needed more than water. He needed rest treatment time, things that couldn't happen if they tried to keep moving. "Take what you need," Ethan said. The young warrior stood up abruptly, his hand going to his knife. He said something rapid and angry to the woman. She responded in the same language, her tone sharp enough to cut. The exchange went back and forth twice before the young warrior fell silent. His hand stayed near his weapon. The woman turned back to Ethan. "He says you poison the water. Wait for us to die." "Water's clean," Ethan said. "I drink from it every day." She studied him for another long moment. Then she walked past him, heading toward the well. He turned to watch her. She peered down into the darkness, then lowered the bucket on its fraying rope. The sound of it hitting water echoed up. When she pulled it back up, she drank again. Deeper this time. Testing. The water was clean. She knew it as soon as it hit her stomach. No poison, no trick, just water. She looked at Ethan over the rim of the bucket, and for the first time, something other than suspicion crossed her face. Something closer to confusion. Or maybe recognition. But before either of them could speak, the older warrior called out a warning. His voice was urgent, his arm pointing east back toward the tree line they'd emerged from. Ethan followed the gesture and felt his stomach drop. More movement in the brush. But these weren't warriors. These were riders. At least 6 of them. And they were coming fast. The riders broke through the tree line like a storm rolling in. 6 men on horseback, rifles visible against their saddles, faces hard with purpose. Ethan recognized the man in front immediately. Cyrus Hale, rancher from 15 miles south. The kind of man who measured his worth by how much land he controlled and how many people feared him. His beard was trimmed neat, his boots expensive. He looked more like a banker than a cattleman, and that was because he was both. The Apache warriors reacted instantly. The young one and the older one moved to flank the woman, their bodies forming a protective line in front of their fallen companion. The woman's hand went to her weapon, her injured shoulder forgotten in the surge of adrenaline. They were trapped, exhausted, wounded, and now caught in the open with nowhere to run. Ethan stood between them and the approaching riders. He hadn't planned to. His feet had just carried him there, putting his body in the space where violence was about to erupt. Hale pulled his horse up 20 feet away. The other riders formed a loose semicircle behind him. His eyes swept over the scene, the Apache warriors, the bucket of water, Ethan standing in the middle of it all. His expression shifted from determination to confusion, to something darker. "Marlowe," Hale said. His voice carried across the distance. "Step aside." Ethan didn't move. "We've been tracking these raiders for 2 days," Hale continued. "They hit the Carson place, killed livestock, burned supplies. We're taking them in." Behind Ethan, the woman spoke quietly in her own language. He couldn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. She was telling her people to be ready, to fight if they had to die fighting rather than be captured. "They came here for water," Ethan said. "That's all." Hale leaned forward in his saddle. "You giving aid to hostiles now, Marlowe? After what they did to your—" He stopped himself, but the words hung in the air anyway, unfinished but understood. Ethan's jaw tightened. "They needed water. I gave it. They're leaving." "The hell they are." One of the other riders, a younger man with a scar across his cheek, raised his rifle slightly. "They're coming with us. Dead or breathing makes no difference to me." The young Apache warrior shifted his weight. His hand tightened on his knife. The movement drew the attention of 2 other riders who adjusted their grips on their own weapons. The air felt compressed, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Look at them, Cyrus," Ethan said, keeping his voice level. "They've got one man who can't even stand. They're not raiders. They're survivors." "Survivors who killed Carson's cattle and left his family without food for winter," Hale shot back. "You want to defend that?" "I want to stop more killing," Ethan said. "Right here, right now." Hale's horse pawed at the ground, sensing its rider's tension. Behind him, the other men were getting restless. Ethan could see it in how they shifted in their saddles, in the way their fingers drummed against their rifles. They'd come here expecting a fight. They wanted one. "You're making a mistake, Marlowe," Hale said. "These people are your enemy. They'll kill you the second you turn your back." Ethan glanced over his shoulder at the woman. She was watching him with those same intense eyes, trying to understand what was happening, what this man was doing by staying between her people and the rifles pointed at them. Her hand was still on her weapon, but she hadn't drawn it. She was waiting, calculating. "Maybe," Ethan said, turning back to Hale. "But that's my choice to make, not yours." The silence that followed was worse than the arguing. Hale's face went hard. His mouth pressed into a thin line. He looked at his men, then back at Ethan. The math was simple. 6 armed riders against 1 unarmed rancher and 5 wounded warriors. But Ethan was standing in the middle, and to get to the Apache, they'd have to go through him first. "You're protecting them," Hale said slowly, as if testing the words to see if they made sense. "I'm standing on my land," Ethan replied, "and I'm telling you to leave." One of the riders laughed. It was a harsh sound, devoid of humor. "You hear this man's lost his mind." But Hale wasn't laughing. He was studying Ethan with a new kind of attention, trying to figure out what had changed in the man he'd known for years. The man who'd lost everything to this same conflict and should have been the first to want revenge. Behind Ethan, the woman lowered her hand from her weapon. Slowly. The gesture was small, but the older warrior noticed it. Then the young one. The tension in their stances eased just slightly, though they remained ready. Hale saw it too. He saw the way the warriors were responding to Ethan's presence, the way the standoff had shifted into something he hadn't anticipated. His horse backed up a step, responding to the pressure of his rider's knees. "This isn't over, Marlowe," Hale said. "Not by a long shot." He pulled his horse around and jerked his head at his men. They followed, reluctant but obedient. The 6 riders turned back toward the tree line. Their departure was slower than their arrival, as if Hale was still considering whether to change his mind. Ethan watched them until they disappeared into the brush. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. His hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up to him. He turned to face the Apache warriors. The woman was staring at him. Not with suspicion anymore, with something else entirely. The wounded warrior's name was Running Wolf. Ethan learned this when the older warrior spoke it quietly while checking the man's breathing. The name meant nothing to Ethan, but the way they said it with a weight that suggested shared history and respect told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just any warrior. This was someone who mattered. The woman approached Ethan slowly. Her movements were more cautious now than when she'd first arrived. The dynamic had shifted. He'd put himself between her people and certain death, and that changed the mathematics of trust in ways neither of them fully understood yet. "You make enemy," she said, gesturing toward where Hale and his men had disappeared. "For us." "I made a choice," Ethan replied. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. "Why?" It was the second time she'd asked. The first time he'd given her the simple answer. This time, standing in the aftermath of what he'd just done, the simple answer wasn't enough. He looked past her at Running Wolf lying in the dirt, at the young warrior who still watched him with suspicion, at the older warrior whose weathered face revealed nothing. "4 years ago," Ethan said slowly, "I had a wife. Her name was Rebecca. And a daughter. Grace. She was 7. The woman went very still. Even the young warrior who'd been pacing near the well stopped moving. "There was a raid," Ethan continued. His voice was flat, emptied of emotion through years of repetition. "Not by your people, by settlers, dressed to look like your people. They wanted the land north of here, thought if they could start a war they could take it." He paused, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. "They killed Rebecca and Grace, made it look like warriors did it, and it worked, started the war they wanted." The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. This one had shape and weight, pressing down on all of them. "I found out the truth 6 months later," Ethan said. "Overheard men talking in town, bragging. They got the land they wanted. My family got buried." He finally looked directly at the woman. "So no, you're not my enemy. You never were." The woman's expression shifted. Something cracked in the careful control she'd maintained. She glanced back at her people, then at Ethan. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "My husband," she said. "My 2 sons, killed by settlers. Real settlers, not men pretending." She touched her wounded shoulder absently. "This from same day. 3 months passed." The parallel hung between them. 2 losses that could never be equaled or compared, but existed in the same space of grief. Ethan understood now why she'd been so suspicious of his help, why trust had become impossible for her. She'd learned the same lesson he had, just from the other direction. The young warrior said something sharp in their language. The woman responded, her tone firm. The young warrior shook his head, clearly disagreeing, but he didn't push further. Instead, he turned his attention to Running Wolf, kneeling beside him to check his wounds. "He does not trust," the woman said to Ethan. "Cannot blame him." "No," Ethan agreed. Can't blame him. The older warrior walked over to the well and lowered the bucket again. This time, there was no hesitation, no testing. He drank, then brought water to Running Wolf. The ritual of it felt significant, like a barrier slowly dissolving. "Your man needs rest," Ethan said, nodding toward Running Wolf. "Real rest, not just water." The woman looked toward the barn, then back at him. "You offer shelter." "I offer the barn. It's not much, but it's better than open ground." "And when riders return?" she asked. Because they both knew Hale would return. Men like him always did. "Then we deal with it," Ethan said. The young warrior stood up abruptly. He strode over to the woman and spoke rapidly, his hands gesturing emphatically. She listened, her face impassive, then responded in a tone that brooked no argument. The young warrior's jaw clenched, but he stepped back. The hierarchy was clear. She led. Her word was final. She turned to Ethan. "We accept, but I stay outside. Watch." "Watch for what?" "For when you change mind," she said simply. "When you remember, we are enemy after all." Ethan wanted to tell her that wouldn't happen, that he'd already made his choice and wouldn't reverse it. But he understood that words meant nothing right now. Only actions mattered. Only time would prove whether this fragile thread of trust could hold any weight. The older warrior and the young one lifted Running Wolf carefully, carrying him toward the barn. Ethan walked ahead of them, pushing the door open. The interior was dim and musty, but it was dry and out of the sun. They laid Running Wolf on a pile of old hay in the corner. As they worked, Ethan noticed something, a shift in how they moved around him. Not friendly, not yet, but not hostile either. Wary acceptance, perhaps, the beginning of something that hadn't existed an hour ago. He stepped outside to find the woman standing near the well, her good hand resting on its stone edge. She was looking east toward the tree line, her body tense with anticipation, waiting for the riders to come back, waiting for the other shoe to drop. But what came through the tree line wasn't riders. It was a woman on foot, moving fast, her dress dusty and torn. She stumbled into the clearing and stopped when she saw them. Her eyes went wide with fear when she recognized the woman as Apache. Then she collapsed. Ethan reached the woman first. She was young, maybe 23, with ash blonde hair matted with sweat and dirt. Her breathing came in short, panicked gasps. When he touched her shoulder to check if she was conscious, she flinched violently. "It's all right," Ethan said. "You're safe." Her eyes opened, unfocused and wild. They landed on the Apache woman standing a few feet away, and she screamed, not loud. Her throat was too dry for that. But the terror in the sound was absolute. She scrambled backward, trying to get away from the woman, from Ethan, from everything. "Please," she gasped. "Please don't, please." The Apache woman took a step back, her hands raised slightly to show she meant no harm. But the settler woman wasn't seeing that. She was seeing an Apache warrior. And in her mind, that meant only one thing. Ethan positioned himself between them, breaking the line of sight. "Look at me," he said to the settler woman. "Just look at me. What happened? Where did you come from?" The woman's breathing slowed slightly, her attention pulled to his face. "Carson Ranch," she managed. "They came, so many of them. We ran. My brother Jacob, he told me to run, and I did, but I heard—" She stopped, her whole body shaking. "I heard the shots." Ethan's stomach went cold. Carson Ranch. The same place Hale had mentioned. The same raid he'd used as justification to hunt this Apache group. He glanced back at the Apache woman, who was watching the exchange with an unreadable expression. "How many attacked?" Ethan asked the settler woman. "At least 20, maybe more. They came at dawn. We didn't have time to—" She broke off again, tears streaming down her face. "My brother, my father. I don't know if they're—" The young Apache warrior emerged from the barn, drawn by the commotion. When he saw the settler woman, he stopped short, said something to the Apache woman in their language. Her response was quick and sharp. The young warrior's face darkened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he disappeared back into the barn. "We need to get her water," Ethan said to the Apache woman. She nodded once and moved to the well, giving the settler woman a wide berth. The settler woman watched her every movement, her body coiled tight, ready to snap. When the Apache woman brought the bucket over and set it down near Ethan, the settler woman looked at it like it might be poisoned. "It's clean," Ethan said. "I promise." She drank anyway, desperation overriding fear. The water seemed to help. Her breathing evened out, and some of the wildness left her eyes. When she lowered the bucket, she looked at Ethan with new awareness. "Why is she here?" The settler woman asked, her voice steadier now. "Why are you helping them?" Before Ethan could answer, the Apache woman spoke. "We not attack Carson Ranch." The settler woman's head snapped toward her. "You're lying." "She's not," Ethan said. "They've been here all morning, wounded. One of them can barely breathe. They couldn't have attacked anyone." The settler woman stared at him, trying to process this information. "But Cyrus Hale said—" "Hale was here," Ethan interrupted. "He saw them. If he's telling people they raided Carson, he's lying." Understanding began to dawn on the settler woman's face, followed immediately by horror. "Then who?" The answer came in the form of gunshots, multiple rifles, coming from the direction of the Carson Ranch, close enough that the sound carried clearly across the morning air, close enough that Ethan could tell there were at least a dozen weapons firing. The Apache woman's head turned sharply toward the sound. The young warrior and the older one emerged from the barn, weapons ready. The settler woman went rigid, her hand clutching Ethan's arm. "That's Carson Place," she whispered. "That's home." More gunshots, then shouting, then silence. The kind of silence that follows violence, heavy and final. Ethan felt the pieces clicking together in his mind, forming a picture he didn't want to see but couldn't ignore. The raid on Carson. Hale tracking Apache warriors who were actually fleeing their own injuries. The convenient timing. The way Hale had looked at him when he'd mentioned what happened to Ethan's family. "It's happening again," Ethan said quietly. "Someone's starting a war, using both sides to do it." The Apache woman met his eyes. She understood. He could see it in the way her expression hardened in the set of her jaw. They were being played. All of them. Settlers and Apache alike. Manipulated into killing each other while someone else profited from the land left empty. The settler woman was shaking again. But this time it wasn't from fear. It was from rage. "My family," she said. "My brother. They killed them too, they—" She couldn't finish the sentence. The older Apache warrior spoke to the woman urgently. She responded, her tone grim. The young warrior joined in, gesturing toward the tree line. They were arguing about something, their voices low but intense. "What are they saying?" Ethan asked. The Apache woman turned to him. "More of my people are coming. Gray Bear saw signs of this morning. They follow our trail. If they find us here with you with her—" She gestured at the settler woman. "They will not understand. They will see enemy and attack." "How long do we have?" "An hour. Maybe less." The settler woman looked between them, her eyes wide. "What do we do?" Ethan looked at the Apache woman. She looked back. Between them stood wounded warriors in his barn, a traumatized settler woman, and riders who would return with reinforcements. And now more Apache warriors coming, who would see this situation as a trap or betrayal. Every choice led to bloodshed. Except maybe one. "We stop them," Ethan said. "All of them. Before more people die for someone else's lies." The Apache woman studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded once, sharp and decisive. "We stop them." But neither of them knew if stopping a war that had already started was even possible. The settler woman's name was Anna Carson. She told them this while pacing near the well, her hands wringing together with nervous energy. She couldn't stay still. Every few seconds her eyes darted toward the tree line, expecting her brother to emerge, expecting someone to come and tell her it had all been a mistake. Ethan knew that look. He'd worn it himself 4 years ago. "We need a plan," the Apache woman said. Her voice cut through the tension. She stood near the barn entrance, positioned where she could see both the eastern and western approaches to the property. "My people come from north. They follow our tracks. When they see us here, they think trap." "Can you explain?" Ethan asked. "Tell them what happened." "Words not enough. Not after what they see already. Too much blood. Too much death." She touched her wounded shoulder again. "They see me with settlers. They think I betray them." The young warrior said something from inside the barn. The Apache woman responded, her tone sharp. The young warrior emerged, his expression dark. He spoke directly to Ethan this time. The words were incomprehensible, but the accusation in them was clear. "He says this is your fault," the Apache woman translated. "Says you bring more danger. Says we should leave now before your people or mine arrive." "He might be right," Ethan said. Anna spun toward him. "You can't let them leave. Those riders, Hale and his men, they'll hunt them down. They'll kill them." "They hunt us anyway," the young warrior said in broken English. His first words spoken in Ethan's language. "We die running or die here. Same thing." "It's not the same," Ethan said. "Running you die for nothing. Here we have a chance to expose what's really happening." The older warrior, Gray Bear, emerged from the barn, leaving Running Wolf inside. He spoke to the Apache woman at length, his weathered face grave. She listened, nodding occasionally, then turned to Ethan. "Gray Bear says there is old way to show peace between enemies. Smoke signal, specific pattern. It means talk, not fight." She paused. "But it means both sides must agree to see it. Must agree to trust." "Will your people honor it?" Ethan asked. "Some will. Enough, maybe." She looked at him directly. "Will yours?" Ethan thought about Hale, about the men who'd followed him here, about the ones who'd killed his family and started this whole cycle of violence. "Some won't," he said. "But there are others. People who are tired of burying their children, their wives, people who want it to stop." Anna wrapped her arms around herself. "Jacob wanted it to stop. He talked about it all the time. Said there had to be another way." Her voice broke. "He's probably dead now because someone else wanted it to continue." The weight of that truth settled over all of them. Someone was profiting from this war. Someone with enough power to manipulate both sides to stage attacks to keep the cycle spinning. And as long as settlers and Apache kept killing each other, that someone remained invisible. "The signal," Ethan said to the Apache woman. "How do we make it?" She gestured to the sky. "Fire. Green wood makes smoke that rises straight. 3 columns, then 2, then 1. Old pattern. Means come to talk. Weapons down." "And if they don't honor it," the young warrior demanded. "If they see signal and attack anyway, then we die," the Apache woman said simply. "But we die trying to stop this, not running from it." The young warrior's jaw worked, his hands clenching into fists. He looked at Gray Bear, who nodded once. Slow and deliberate. The old warrior's agreement seemed to matter. The young warrior's shoulders dropped slightly, the fight draining out of him. "We need green wood," Ethan said. "And we need it fast." They scattered to gather what they needed. Anna helped, despite her shaking hands dragging branches from the tree line. Gray Bear went to check on Running Wolf again, then returned with strips of cloth they could use to control the smoke. The young warrior moved like a shadow, quick and efficient, his earlier hostility channeled into action. Ethan worked alongside the Apache woman, building the fire structure near the well where it would be visible from all directions. Their hands brushed occasionally as they worked, and neither of them pulled away. The gesture was small, almost insignificant, but it felt like something larger. An acknowledgement of the impossible thing they were attempting. "Your wife and daughter," the Apache woman said quietly as they worked. "They would be proud what you do today." Ethan didn't respond immediately. He placed another branch, positioning it carefully. I don't know about proud, but maybe they'd understand. That's enough. She nodded. My sons would not understand. Too young. But my husband, he was like you. Wanted peace. Tried to find way. She paused. It got him killed. Maybe we'll do better, Ethan said. Maybe we all die trying, she replied. But there was something in her voice that wasn't resignation. It was determination. The kind that came from having nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. The fire structure was complete. Ethan struck flint against steel. The sparks caught. The green wood smoked immediately, thick white columns rising into the still air. The Apache woman adjusted the branches, creating the pattern. 3 columns, then 2, then 1. Over and over. The signal was visible for miles in every direction. Anna stood beside them, watching the smoke rise. How long before they see it? Not long, the Apache woman said. Not long at all. As if summoned by her words, movement erupted from the northern tree line. Not riders. Warriors. At least 15 of them moving in formation, weapons ready. And at the front walked a figure Ethan recognized even at a distance by the way the others deferred to him. An Apache war chief. Coming fast. Coming angry. And behind Ethan from the western tree line came the sound of horses. Hale had returned, and he'd brought more men. At least 20 riders, all armed, all ready for a fight. Both sides saw the smoke signal. Both sides saw each other, and both sides were too close to turn back now. The two groups stopped 50 feet apart with Ethan's property in between. The Apache warriors formed a line to the north, weapons drawn but not raised. The riders clustered to the west, rifles visible across their saddles. The smoke signal continued to rise between them. 3 columns to 2 to 1. Over and over. Nobody moved. Ethan stood near the well, the Apache woman beside him. Anna remained close to the barn, her face pale. The young warrior and Gray Bear had positioned themselves near Ethan, not in front of him, but alongside. The gesture wasn't lost on anyone watching. The Apache war chief stepped forward. He was tall, his face marked with scars that told of decades of survival. His eyes swept over the scene, taking in the Apache woman's wounded shoulder, the settlers, the smoke signal. When he spoke, his voice carried across the distance like thunder. The Apache woman responded in the same language, her tone respectful, but firm. The exchange went back and forth, rapid and intense. The other warriors watched, their grips tightening on their weapons. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but he understood the dynamics. The Apache woman was being challenged, her choices questioned, her authority tested. From the western side, Hale had dismounted. He walked forward slowly, his hand resting on his pistol. Behind him, his men did the same, creating a wall of armed settlers. When Hale spoke, his voice was cold. You made your choice, Marlowe. Now you live with it. This isn't about choices, Ethan said. This is about truth. Truth. Hale laughed, but there was no humor in it. The truth is, you're standing with the people who killed your family. The people who've been raiding our settlements for months. That's the only truth that matters. They didn't raid Carson, Ethan said loudly, projecting his voice so everyone could hear. They've been here all morning, wounded, one of them dying. They couldn't have attacked anyone. Anna stepped forward, her voice shaking, but clear. He's right. I saw the raiders who attacked our ranch. There were at least 20 of them, organized, well-armed. She pointed at the Apache woman's group. These people are barely standing. Hale's expression darkened. You're defending them after what they did to your family. I'm telling the truth, Anna said. Something you're apparently not interested in. The war chief spoke again, his tone sharp. The Apache woman responded, then turned to Ethan. He asks why we trust settlers, why we stand with you. He says it is betrayal. Tell him, Ethan said, that we're all being betrayed by someone who wants us to keep killing each other. The Apache woman translated. The war chief's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or suspicion that there was truth in the words. Gray Bear stepped forward and spoke directly to the war chief. His voice was quiet, but it carried weight. The other warriors listened. Some nodded slowly. When he finished, the war chief studied him for a long moment before responding. "What did he say?" Ethan asked the Apache woman. Gray Bear tells him about tracks we saw 3 days ago. Settlers moving at night, dressed in our clothing. He saw them but could not follow. Too many, too dangerous. She paused. He tells them we have seen this before. Raids that make no sense. Attacks that serve no purpose except to spread anger. One of Hale's men shouted, "You expect us to believe that someone's pretending to be them?" "I believe it," Anna said. "Because the same thing happened to Ethan's family. Settlers dressed as warriors, starting a war so they could take land." Hale's face went very still. Too still. Ethan watched him, saw the moment of calculation, the flicker of something that might have been fear, or might have been guilt. "That's a serious accusation," Hale said slowly. "It's the truth," Ethan replied. "Someone's been playing both sides, staging attacks, making sure we stay enemies, making sure we keep killing each other." He stepped forward closer to Hale. "The question is, who benefits, who gets the land when we're all dead?" The silence that followed was absolute. Every person there understood what Ethan was suggesting. Someone with resources, someone with influence, someone who could move between both communities without suspicion. The war chief spoke again, his tone different now, questioning rather than accusing. The Apache woman translated. "He asks who this person might be. Who has such power?" Before Ethan could answer, one of the riders shifted nervously. A younger man. His face flushed. He glanced at Hale, then away quickly. Too quickly. The movement was small, but Ethan caught it. So did the Apache woman. So did the war chief. Hale noticed their attention and turned to the young rider. "Something you want to say, Reed?" Reed shook his head rapidly. "No, sir. Nothing." But his hands were shaking. And when Hale looked at him, there was something in that look that Ethan recognized. The same look predators give prey when they're deciding whether to strike. Anna gasped. She'd seen it too. "You," she said to Hale. "It was you, all along." Hale's hand moved toward his pistol, but before he could draw, the war chief barked an order. Instantly, 3 Apache warriors had arrows nocked and aimed. Not at Ethan, at Hale. The riders tensed, raising their rifles. The warriors readied their weapons. Everyone was a heartbeat away from bloodshed. Ethan stepped directly into the line of fire. "Stop!" His voice cut through the tension like a blade. He stood between the two groups, arms spread wide, making himself the most vulnerable target on the field. "If you start shooting," he said, his voice carrying to everyone, "you prove him right. You prove that we can't stop, that we're too far gone." He turned to face the war chief. "Your people have lost enough, haven't they?" The war chief's expression was unreadable, but he didn't lower his weapon. Ethan turned to Hale's men. "And you've buried how many friends? How many family members? How much more will you sacrifice for someone else's profit?" Reed spoke up, his voice breaking. "He told us it was them. He showed us tracks, gave us locations, said we had to strike first or they'd wipe us out." "Shut your mouth," Hale snarled. But it was too late. The truth was spilling out now, and everyone could hear it. Another rider spoke up. "He's been buying up land. Every family that gets wiped out, he makes an offer to whoever's left. Been doing it for 2 years. The war chief lowered his weapon slowly. He spoke to the Apache woman, his tone shifting from anger to something colder, more calculating. She nodded and translated for Ethan. "He says they have seen this too. Families disappearing. Land changing hands. Always the same man making offers." She looked at Hale. "Always you." Retry Hale's face twisted. He was trapped and he knew it. but trapped men were dangerous. His hand was still near his pistol, and Ethan could see the calculations running behind his eyes. How many could he kill before they took him down? How much damage could he do? Before anyone could move, the Apache woman stepped forward to stand beside Ethan. Then the young warrior. Then Gray Bear. Then Anna, walking away from the barn with her chin raised. Then Reed dismounting and moving away from the other riders. One by one, people from both sides moved into the middle ground, creating a wall of bodies between Hale and escape. The message was clear. The war was over. And Hale had lost. Hale's hand moved toward his pistol, but he never cleared the holster. The war chief was faster, crossing the distance in 3 strides and striking Hale's wrist with the flat of his blade. The pistol fell to the dirt. 2 riders moved to help their former leader, but the other settlers blocked them, rifles lowered but bodies firm. "It's over, Cyrus," Reed said. "No more." Hale looked around at the faces surrounding him. Settlers he'd led. Warriors he'd manipulated. All of them watching him with the same expression. Not hatred. Something colder. Understanding. They saw him now for what he was. Not a protector. A predator who'd fed on their grief. The war chief spoke his words deliberate. The Apache woman translated. "He says Hale will be taken to territorial marshal. Both our people will testify. Both our people will see justice." "You can't," Hale said, his voice losing its authority, becoming something desperate. "I was protecting us. The land. The territory. Someone had to take control." "You took lives," Anna said. Her voice was steady now, no longer shaking. "My brother. Ethan's wife and daughter. How many others?" Hale had no answer. Or perhaps he had too many answers, and none of them would save him now. 2 Apache warriors bound Hale's hands. Not roughly, but efficiently. This wasn't revenge. It was necessity. Reed and another settler agreed to ride with them to the marshal's office, serving as witnesses from both sides. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Former enemies now traveling together to deliver justice. As they prepared to leave the war, Chief approached Ethan. He spoke at length, his tone formal. The Apache woman stood beside Ethan, translating quietly. "He says you did something today that should not have been possible. You gave water to your enemy. You stood between weapons and certain death. You made warriors and settlers see truth together." She paused. "He says this is how wars end. Not with victory. With someone brave enough to stop fighting." The war chief extended his hand. Ethan took it. The handshake was firm, brief, but it represented something larger than either of them. An acknowledgement. A beginning. "Tell him," Ethan said, "that the water was free. It always will be." The Apache woman translated. The war chief's expression softened slightly. He nodded once, then returned to his warriors. They began the journey toward the territorial capital. Hale walking between them, his head down. The remaining settlers dispersed slowly. Many of them stopped to speak with Ethan before they left, apologizing, thanking him, promising to spread word of what really happened. The story would travel fast now. The truth always did once someone was brave enough to speak it. Anna lingered near the barn. "I need to go back," she said quietly, "to Carson. To see what's left. To bury." She couldn't finish. "I'll help," the Apache woman said. "My people will help. We rebuild together." Anna looked at her for a long moment, then she nodded. "Together." The young warrior emerged from the barn with Gray Bear supporting Running Wolf between them. The wounded warrior was conscious now, his breathing stronger. He looked at Ethan and spoke a few words. Gray Bear translated into broken English. "He says he owes you his life, says debt will be remembered." "No debt," Ethan said. "Just water." But they all knew it had been more than that. It had been a choice that rippled outward, touching everyone who witnessed it, changing something fundamental in how they saw each other. The Apache warriors prepared to leave, taking Running Wolf with them. The Apache woman remained behind, standing near the well. The same well where this had all begun just hours ago. It felt like a lifetime had passed since then. "You gave water," she said to Ethan. Simple thing, but it changed everything. "You took it," Ethan replied. "That changed everything too." She smiled. It was small, tired, but genuine. "Maybe there is hope for both our peoples." "Maybe," Ethan agreed. But even as the words left his mouth, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats, coming fast from the south. Too many of them. The Apache woman heard it too. Her hand went to her weapon. The young warrior and Gray Bear turned, positioning themselves protectively around Running Wolf. Anna stepped closer to Ethan, her face pale. "More riders." "Sounds like it," Ethan said. But when the group emerged from the tree line, Ethan saw something he hadn't expected. These weren't Hale's men. They were territorial militia, at least 30 of them led by a man in a federal marshal's uniform. The marshal pulled his horse up 20 feet away. His eyes swept over the scene. Apache warriors, settlers, all of them armed, all of them standing together. His hand rested on his rifle. "I'm Marshal Thomas Garrett," he said. "We received reports of Apache raids in this area. Multiple homesteads hit. I'm here to—" He stopped, his gaze landing on Ethan. "Marlowe. That you—" Ethan nodded. "It's me, Tom." The marshal's expression shifted to confusion. "What in God's name is happening here? We got word that Cyrus Hale was tracking hostiles, that there'd been attacks." "There were attacks," Ethan said. "But not by them." He gestured to the Apache warriors. "Hale staged them, killed settlers and Apache alike to start a war, so he could buy up the land cheap." Marshal Garrett's face went hard. "That's a serious accusation, Marlowe." "It's the truth," Anna said, stepping forward. "I'm Anna Carson. My family's ranch was attacked this morning. I saw the raiders. They weren't Apache. They were settlers, dressed to look like Apache. And Cyrus Hale was behind it." The marshal looked at her, then at the Apache warriors, then back at Ethan. "Where's Hale now?" "On his way to the territorial capital," Ethan said. "Under guard. Apache and settler witnesses both. They're taking him to face charges." "Under whose authority?" The Apache woman spoke up. "Under authority of truth. Your law, our law. Both say murder is wrong. Both say stealing is wrong. Hale did both." Marshal Garrett studied her for a long moment. Then he looked at his men. "Daniels, take 10 men and ride north. Find that party and escort them safely to the capital. I want Hale in custody before nightfall." One of the militiamen nodded and signaled to the others. They rode out, heading in the direction the war chief's group had taken. The marshal dismounted and walked toward Ethan. "This is your property." "It is." "And you gave shelter to Apache warriors, knowing they were being hunted." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Ethan met his gaze. "I gave water to people who needed it. That's all." "That's all," the marshal repeated. He shook his head slowly. "You realize what you've done here, Marlowe? You've just prevented a full-scale war. If Hale had succeeded, if settlers and Apache had kept killing each other, this whole territory would have burned." "I didn't prevent anything," Ethan said. "We all did." He gestured to the Apache woman, to Anna, to the warriors standing nearby. "Every person here made a choice. To see the truth instead of the lie. To stop fighting long enough to listen." Marshal Garrett looked around at the assembled group. Settlers and Apache, standing together. Not fighting, not fleeing, just standing. "I'll need statements," he said finally. "From all of you, for the trial." "You'll have them," Ethan said. The marshal nodded. Then he did something unexpected. He walked over to the Apache woman and extended his hand. "I don't know your name, ma'am, but I want to thank you. For your restraint, for your willingness to trust when you had every reason not to." The Apache woman looked at his hand for a moment, then she took it. "My name is Catherine," she said. "Catherine Stormwalker." It was the first time Ethan had heard her English name, the first time she'd offered it freely. "Catherine," the marshal repeated. "I'll remember that." He turned to his remaining men. "Set up camp at the Carson place. We'll use it as a base while we gather evidence and take statements, and spread the word to all homesteads in the area. The raids are over. The real enemy has been caught." As the militiamen dispersed, the young Apache warrior approached Ethan. He looked uncomfortable, his jaw tight with the effort of what he was about to say. "I was wrong," he said in halting English. "About you. About this." He gestured to the space between them. "I thought you trap us. Thought all settlers same. But you different." "I'm not different," Ethan said. "I just made a different choice." The young warrior considered this. Then he nodded slowly. "Maybe we all make different choice now." He walked back to join Gray Bear and Running Wolf. But before he did, he turned and spoke again. "My name is Tommy. Tommy Yellowhawk. You remember that?" "I will," Ethan said. Anna had been speaking with one of the militiamen getting information about her family's ranch. When she returned, her face was drawn, but no longer quite so pale. "They found Jacob," she said quietly. "He's alive. Wounded, but alive. My father, too. They fought off the raiders until help came." Relief flooded through Ethan. "That's good news." "It is," Anna agreed. "But it doesn't change what almost happened here, what Hale almost made us do to each other." She looked at Catherine. "I'm sorry, for being afraid of you, for assuming the worst." Catherine shook her head. "You were hurt, scared. Anyone would be." "Maybe," Anna said. "But that's not an excuse. Not anymore." The two women looked at each other. A settler and an Apache. Both of them carrying losses that could never be undone, but both of them choosing to see past those losses to something else, something that might be the beginning of understanding. Marshal Garrett called out from where he was organizing his men. "Miss Carson, we're ready to escort you back to your property whenever you're ready." Anna nodded. She looked at Ethan. "Thank you. For what you did today. For standing up when you had every reason to just walk away." "I had every reason to stand up," Ethan said. "That's why I did it." Anna smiled faintly. Then she turned and walked toward the waiting horses. The afternoon sun was starting its descent now. The day had felt endless, but somehow it was still only afternoon. Ethan's body ached with exhaustion. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind a bone-deep weariness. Catherine remained near the well. Gray Bear and Tommy were helping Running Wolf back toward the tree line, preparing to return to their people. But Catherine hadn't moved. Ethan walked over to her. "You should go," he said. "Get that shoulder looked at properly. Rest." "I will," she said. "Soon." She turned to face him fully. "But first I want to say something. Want to say it in English so you understand clearly." Ethan waited. Catherine took a breath. 4 years you carry your loss. 4 years you live with pain. But you do not let pain make you cruel. Do not let it make you blind. Today you could have turned away. Could have let us die. No one would blame you. She paused. But you didn't. You saw people who needed help, and you helped. That takes courage most people do not have. "It wasn't courage," Ethan said. "It was just the right thing to do." "Maybe they are same thing," Catherine said. "Maybe courage is doing right thing when it would be easier to do wrong thing." She reached out and touched his arm briefly. The gesture was simple, but it felt significant. An acknowledgement of something that had passed between them over the course of this impossible day. "I will remember this," she said. "Will remember you. And when my people ask what happened today, I will tell them truth, that there are still good people in this world, on both sides." "Will you come back?" Ethan asked. The question surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Catherine considered it. "I do not know. My people, they will need time. We'll need to see if what happened today is real. If this peace holds." She looked toward the tree line where her warriors waited. "But if it does hold, if things change, then yes. I will come back. For water." The way she said it, for water, made it clear she meant something more. Not just the well, but this place, this beginning, this fragile thread of trust that had formed between them. "Water's always free," Ethan said, "for anyone who needs it." Catherine smiled again, that same small, tired smile. "I know." She turned and walked toward her people. Tommy and Gray Bear fell into step beside her. Running Wolf, though still weak, managed to walk on his own now. The four of them disappeared into the tree line, moving north toward wherever their people were camped. Ethan stood alone by the well as the shadows grew longer. The bucket sat on the stone rim, empty but clean. He'd fill it again tomorrow, and the day after, and every day that followed. The well would keep giving water to whoever needed it. Settler or Apache, enemy or friend. Because Ethan had learned something today that he'd forgotten in his years of grief. The distance between enemy and human was sometimes just one act of kindness, one bucket of water, one choice to see the person standing in front of you instead of the uniform they wore or the blood they'd spilled. Marshal Garrett approached as Ethan was drawing fresh water. "You've got a good well here, Marlowe. Water's clear." "It's never failed me," Ethan said. The marshal nodded, looking out across the property. "You know what you've started here today, don't you? Word's going to spread. About what happened. About how you brought two sides together. People are going to look to you. Ask you to help mediate disputes. Keep the peace." "I'm no peacekeeper," Ethan said. "I'm just a rancher." "You're more than that now," Marshal Garrett said. "Whether you want to be or not." He clapped Ethan on the shoulder. "I'll be back in a few days to take your full statement. In the meantime, you should get some rest. You look like you've been through a war." "I have," Ethan said. "We all have." The marshal mounted his horse and rode out with the last of his men heading toward the Carson place. Their hoofbeats faded into the distance, and finally, Ethan was alone. He carried the bucket of water to the fence post and set it down. Then he walked to the barn to check on the space where Running Wolf had lain. The hay was disturbed, marked with blood. He'd clean it tomorrow. Add it to the list of things he'd get to eventually. But for now, he just stood there in the dimness of the barn, letting the events of the day wash over him. The fear, the tension, the moment when he'd stepped between those rifles and realized he might die. The look in Catherine's eyes when she'd first seen him, and the look in her eyes when she'd left. Something had changed today, not just between settlers and Apache, but inside himself. For 4 years he'd been living in the shadow of his loss, going through the motions of survival without ever really being alive. Today, for the first time since Rebecca and Grace died, he'd felt something other than grief. He'd felt purpose. Ethan walked back outside. The sun was touching the horizon now, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The smoke from their signal fire had long since dissipated, but he could still see where they'd built it. Could still see Catherine kneeling beside it, adjusting the branches to create the pattern that had brought both sides together. 3 columns, then 2, then 1. A message of peace in a language both sides could understand. He wondered if she was safe now, if her people had accepted her explanation, if the war chief had honored what happened here today, or if old hatreds would prove too strong to overcome. He wondered if he'd ever see her again. The wondering surprised him. 4 years he'd been alone, and he'd convinced himself that was how it should be. That he didn't deserve companionship after failing to protect his family. But today had shown him something different. That maybe moving forward didn't mean forgetting. That maybe there was space in his life for both grief and hope, for both loss and new beginnings. The stars were starting to appear now, one by one, like distant fires being lit across the darkening sky. Ethan sat down on the edge of the well, his back against the stone, and let himself just breathe. Tomorrow, he'd repair the rope, fix the barn door, maybe even ride into town and face the questions that would surely come. But tonight, he could just sit here and feel the weight of what had happened. The impossible thing they'd accomplished. They'd stopped a war, not permanently maybe, but for today, and sometimes that was enough. 3 days passed before Ethan saw anyone again. 3 days of fixing the rope, mending the barn door, and sitting by the well in the evenings, wondering if what had happened was real or just some fever dream brought on by heat and desperation. On the 4th day, Anna Carson came riding up the path with her brother Jacob beside her. Jacob's left arm was in a sling, and he moved stiffly in the saddle, but he was alive. That was what mattered. Ethan was hauling water when they arrived. He set the bucket down and walked over to meet them. "Miss Carson," he said, tipping his hat. "Good to see you." "It's Anna," she said, dismounting. "I think after what we've been through we can skip the formalities." Jacob dismounted more carefully, favoring his injured side. He extended his good hand to Ethan. "Jacob Carson, Anna told me what you did, what you risked." Ethan shook his hand. "I didn't do anything you wouldn't have done." "That's where you're wrong," Jacob said. "Most men would have turned them away. Let Hale's men have them. I'm not sure I wouldn't have done the same, and I like to think I'm a decent person." "Decency and fear look different when you're staring down rifles," Ethan said. Anna pulled a cloth-wrapped bundle from her saddlebag. "We brought bread, fresh baked this morning, and some preserves. It's not much, but—" "It's more than enough," Ethan said. "Thank you." They sat in the shade by the well, sharing the bread and talking in the careful way people do when they're still figuring out how to be around each other. Jacob asked about the ranch, about the drought, about whether Ethan needed help with repairs. Anna asked about Catherine, about whether he'd heard anything from the Apache camp. "Nothing yet," Ethan said. "But I reckon that's normal. They've got their own business to tend to." "Marshal Garrett came by yesterday," Jacob said. "Took our statements about the attack, about what we saw. He says the trial's set for 3 weeks from now in the territorial capital." "He came here too," Ethan said. "Wrote down everything that happened, said both sides would testify." "Both sides," Jacob repeated. He looked at his sister. "A month ago, I wouldn't have believed that was possible. A week ago, I wouldn't have," Anna said quietly. They finished the bread, and Jacob stood wincing slightly. "We should head back. Still a lot to rebuild. But Ethan, if you need anything, you come find us. We owe you." "You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not," Jacob said. "But I'd like to think we're friends now, and friends help each other." After they left, Ethan went back to his repairs, but his mind kept returning to Jacob's words. Friends. It had been a long time since he'd had any of those. 4 years of isolation had a way of making you forget what connection felt like. 2 days later, Tommy Yellowhawk appeared at the tree line. Ethan was working on the fence when he saw the young warrior emerge from the brush. Tommy raised his hand in greeting, the gesture cautious but not hostile. Ethan set down his hammer and walked over. "Tommy." "Ethan." They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure how to proceed. The last time they'd seen each other, they'd been standing between 2 armed groups trying to prevent a massacre. This felt different, quieter, more uncertain. "Catherine sent me," Tommy said finally. "She wants to know if the water is still free." "It is," Ethan said. "Always will be." Tommy nodded slowly. "She also wants to know if you would come to our camp, to meet with the council. They want to hear your words about what happened." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. Going to an Apache camp alone. Putting himself at the mercy of people who had every reason to mistrust him. It should have terrified him. But all he felt was curious. "When?" "Tomorrow. At sunrise. I will meet you at the North Trail and take you." "I'll be there," Ethan said. Tommy turned to leave, then stopped. Ethan, I said things before, about you, about settlers. I was wrong. You were scared, Ethan said. We all were. Still wrong, Tommy said. Catherine says being scared is not excuse for being cruel. She is right. He disappeared back into the brush before Ethan could respond. That night, Ethan lay awake in the darkness of his small cabin, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Rebecca, about Grace, about the last time he'd trusted someone completely, and how that trust had been rewarded with graves. But he also thought about Catherine's face when she'd drunk from that bucket, the way her suspicion had slowly dissolved into something else. Not trust exactly. Not yet. But the possibility of trust. The willingness to consider it. Maybe that was enough to start with. He rose before dawn and rode to the North Trail. Tommy was waiting exactly where he'd said he'd be. The young warrior nodded and started walking. Ethan followed, leading his horse through terrain that grew increasingly rough as they moved deeper into Apache territory. They walked for nearly 2 hours before the camp came into view. It was smaller than Ethan had expected, maybe 30 people total. Women tending fires, children playing, men working on weapons and tools. All of them stopped what they were doing when they saw Ethan approach. The silence was heavy, watchful. Not hostile exactly, but not welcoming either. Catherine emerged from one of the shelters. Her shoulder was still bandaged, but she moved more easily now. She walked straight to Ethan and greeted him in her own language first, then in English. You came. You asked, Ethan said simply. She gestured toward a larger shelter at the center of the camp. The council waits. They will ask questions. Some will be hard, some may be angry, but they have agreed to listen. That's all I can ask for. The council consisted of 7 elders, including the war chief Ethan had seen at his property, and Gray Bear. They sat in a semicircle, their faces grave. Catherine sat beside Ethan, translating when needed. The war chief spoke first. His voice was formal, measured. Catherine translated. He says you are welcome here as guest, that Catherine and Gray Bear have spoken on your behalf. But the council must understand why you helped our people, why you put yourself between us and death. Ethan looked at each of the elders in turn. 4 years ago, I lost my wife and daughter. I thought Apache warriors killed them. I was wrong. It was settlers dressed as Apache trying to start a war. When your people came to my property wounded and desperate, I saw people who needed help. Not enemies. Just people. I gave them water because it was the right thing to do. Because I'd learned what happens when we let hate make our choices for us. The war chief translated for those who didn't understand English. There were nods, murmurs. One of the female elders spoke, her voice sharp. Catherine hesitated before translating. She asks how she can trust your words. Says settlers have lied before, made promises they did not keep. I'm not asking you to trust me, Ethan said. I'm asking you to judge me by my actions. I stood between rifles and your people. I gave shelter when I could have turned you away. I spoke truth when lies would have been easier. That's all I have to offer. Another elder spoke. This one's voice was gentler. He says actions speak louder than words, Catherine translated. He asks what you want from us now, what you expect in return for what you did. Nothing, Ethan said. I don't want anything. I just want to stop more people from dying for lies, to stop more families from burying their children. Gray Bear spoke then. His words were long and thoughtful. Catherine translated in pieces. Gray Bear says he has lived many years, has seen many wars, has seen many men who spoke of peace but meant conquest. He says you are different. You ask for nothing. You offer freely. This is rare. This is valuable. The war chief spoke again, his tone shifting. Catherine smiled slightly as she translated. He says if you want nothing, then we give you something anyway. We give you our word that no Apache warrior will harm you or your property, that you will be protected as if you were one of our own. This is great honor, not given lightly. Ethan felt the weight of what was being offered. Protection from an Apache war chief meant something in this territory. It meant safety that no amount of money could buy. "I'm honored," Ethan said. "Truly, but I'd ask for something else instead." The council members looked at each other confused. Catherine leaned forward, slightly curious. "What do you ask?" "Peace," Ethan said. "Real peace, between your people and mine. Not just an agreement between warriors, but understanding between families, trade, communication, a chance to prove that what happened at my property wasn't just luck, that it can happen again, that it can last." The silence that followed was long. The elders spoke among themselves in their language, their voices rising and falling in debate. Finally, the war chief raised his hand and they fell silent. He spoke directly to Ethan, his eyes never leaving his face. Catherine translated her voice steady. "He says this is bigger than one man can promise, bigger than one council can decide. But he will take your words to the other Apache leaders. We'll tell them what happened. We'll tell them about the settler who gave water and stood against his own people for justice." The war chief paused, then continued. "He says if your people show good faith, our people will answer. If they speak truth, we will speak truth. But trust must be earned on both sides, cannot be commanded." "I understand," Ethan said. The council meeting ended with a meal. Simple food, but shared freely. Ethan ate with Catherine and Gray Bear, listening as they talked about the camp, about the challenges of feeding everyone through the drought, about the children who needed education, and the elders who needed medicine. "Marshal Garrett is setting up a meeting," Ethan said. "In 2 weeks, at the Carson place. He wants representatives from the Apache camp and from the settler community to talk about how to prevent another Hale from starting another war." Catherine set down her food. "Will your people come? Will they listen?" "Some will," Ethan said. "The ones who are tired of fighting. The ones who've buried family and friends and don't want to bury more. Those people will listen. And the others? The others will take time. Or maybe they'll never come around. But we don't need everyone. We just need enough." Gray Bear spoke in English, his words slow but clear. "Enough is good start. Start is all we need." After the meal, Catherine walked Ethan back to where Tommy waited with his horse. The camp was quieter now, people settling in for the evening. Children's laughter drifted from one of the shelters. "Your people," Ethan said. "They've been through so much, lost so much. But they're still here, still fighting to survive." "That is all we can do," Catherine said. "Survive. Try to build something better for children, for future." She looked at him. "What you did giving water standing up that gives us hope. Shows children that not all settlers are enemy, that maybe future can be different from past." "I hope so," Ethan said, "for all our sakes." Catherine reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out something small. She pressed it into his hand. It was a stone, smooth and dark with white markings that looked like running water. "From sacred place near here," she said. "We give to friends, to people who show honor. You keep it. Remember that you have friends among Apache people, that you are not alone." Ethan closed his hand around the stone. It was warm from being against her body. "Thank you," he said. "I'll treasure it." "I will see you at meeting," Catherine said. 2 weeks. I will come. We'll bring others who want peace." "I'll be there," Ethan said. He mounted his horse and followed Tommy back through the trails. When they reached the edge of his property, Tommy stopped. "Catherine is right about you," the young warrior said. "You are different. Good different." "I'm just trying to do what's right," Ethan said. "That is what makes you different," Tommy replied. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Marshal Garrett came by twice more, finalizing plans for the meeting. Jacob and Anna stopped by 3 more times, bringing food and helping with repairs to the barn. Other settlers started coming too cautiously at first, then with more confidence. Word had spread about what Ethan had done. And people wanted to see the man who'd stood between two armies with nothing but his own body and his conviction. Some came to thank him. Others came to question him, to understand why he'd risk so much for people who weren't his own. Ethan gave them all the same answer. Because it was right. Because he'd lost enough to know that hate only bred more loss. A few came angry, accusing him of betrayal of consorting with the enemy. Those conversations were harder. But Ethan stood his ground, speaking calmly about what he'd witnessed, about Hale's manipulation, about the possibility of something better than endless war. Most left still angry. But a few left thoughtful. And that was enough. On the morning of the meeting, Ethan rose early and dressed carefully. He strapped on his father's old belt, the one with the silver buckle that had survived 3 generations. He cleaned his boots until they shone. This meeting mattered. People needed to see that he took it seriously. The Carson place had been partially rebuilt. The burned sections were still visible, blackened wood, stark against new timber. But the main structure was sound, and a large open area had been cleared for the gathering. Ethan arrived to find nearly 40 settlers already there. Some he recognized. Others were strangers from distant homesteads. Marshal Garrett stood near the house talking with Jacob and Anna. When he saw Ethan, he waved him over. "Good turnout," the marshal said. "Better than I expected. People are curious. Some are hopeful. Some are just here to see what happens." "And the Apache?" Ethan asked. "Not here yet, but it's still early." The settlers milled around, talking in low voices. Ethan could feel the tension, the uncertainty. These people had lived in fear for so long, had lost so much to this conflict. Trusting their enemies didn't come naturally. An hour passed, then another. Some settlers started to leave, muttering about wasted time, about how they'd known the Apache wouldn't show, about how this whole thing was foolish from the start. Ethan felt doubt creeping in. What if Catherine couldn't convince her people to come? What if the council had decided it was too risky? What if movement at the tree line? Everyone froze. Apache warriors emerged from the brush. Not attacking. Walking slowly, deliberately. Catherine led them with Gray Bear and Tommy flanking her. Behind them came others. Women, children, elders. At least 30 people total. The settlers stirred uneasily. Hands moved toward weapons. Marshal Garrett stepped forward quickly, his voice carrying. "Everyone stays calm. These people are here under truce, under my protection and the protection of territorial law. Anyone who breaks that truce answers to me." The tension held for another moment. Then Jacob Carson stepped forward. He walked toward Catherine, his injured arm still in its sling. When he reached her, he extended his good hand. "Miss Stormwalker, thank you for coming, for bringing your people. We have much to discuss." Catherine looked at his hand, then she took it. "We have much to hear also, much to say. Hope we can find words both sides understand." Anna joined her brother standing beside him. Then Ethan walked forward, then others. Slowly the two groups came together in the cleared area, forming a loose circle. Settlers and Apache, not separated, intermingled. Marshal Garrett stood at the center. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "What we do here today has never been done before. Two peoples who've been at war sitting down to talk, to listen, to try to find a better way forward." He gestured to Catherine. "Miss Stormwalker has agreed to speak first, to share her people's grievances and their hopes. I ask that everyone listen with open minds and open hearts." Catherine stepped forward. She spoke first in her own language, her words flowing strong and clear. Then she switched to English, translating for the settlers. "My people have lived on this land for generations beyond counting. We have seen seasons change, buffalo run, rivers flow. Then settlers came, at first few. We shared land, shared water. Some became friends." She paused. "But more came, and more. They wanted all land, all water, pushed us to places where nothing grows, where children go hungry. When we fought to protect what was ours, we were called savages. When we sought peace, we were called weak. Her voice carried across the gathered crowd, strong, despite the pain Ethan knew she still carried in her shoulder and in her heart. We did not want war. War came to us. And when Cyrus Hale made us fight each other, made us kill each other, he took from both sides. Took land, took lives, took hope. But one man stopped him. She looked directly at Ethan. One man gave water when he could have given death. One man stood between weapons when he could have walked away. One man chose to see people instead of enemies. That man showed my people that peace is possible. Now we ask, do rest of you believe same thing? The silence that followed was profound. Every person there felt the weight of her question, the challenge in it. An older settler stood up. His face was weathered, his beard gray. Ethan recognized him as Thomas Webb, a rancher from 10 miles east who'd lost his son in a raid 2 years ago. "My boy died," Webb said, his voice rough with old grief. "Died protecting our cattle from raiders. I spent 2 years hating every Apache I heard about, wishing them all dead." He looked at Catherine, but Hale confessed, said he ordered that raid, paid men to dress up like warriors and attack my place so I'd sell him my land cheap. My son died for one man's greed. His voice broke. "I can't get my boy back, but I can make sure he didn't die for nothing. I can make sure other fathers don't bury their sons for lies." He extended his hand toward Catherine. "I want peace. Real peace, if you'll have it." Catherine crossed the space between them and took his hand. The two of them stood there, a settler father and an Apache leader, holding on to each other like drowning people holding on to driftwood. One by one, others stood, shared their stories, their losses, their anger, their exhaustion. Both settlers and Apache spoke, and as they did, patterns emerged. The same names kept coming up, the same suspicious circumstances. Raids that made no strategic sense, attacks that seemed designed to provoke rather than to gain territory or resources. Hale hadn't worked alone. That became clear. There were others, land speculators, railroad men, politicians who saw opportunity in conflict. The web was larger than anyone had realized. "We need to document everything," Marshall Garrett said. "Every suspicious raid, every land grab, every person who profited from this war. Build a case that goes beyond just Hale. Show the territorial government that this was a conspiracy." "We will help," Gray Bear said in his careful English. "Apache people remember every attack, remember every loss. We write it down, give to Marshall." "And we'll do the same," Jacob said. "Create a record that can't be ignored or dismissed." Anna stood up, her voice clear and strong. "We should also create something else, a council, made up of both settlers and Apache. That meets regularly to address disputes before they become violence. That shares resources during hard times. That builds trust through action, not just words." "A peace council," Catherine said, slowly testing the words. "Both peoples represented equally." "Exactly," Anna said. The crowd murmured. Some nodded enthusiastically. Others looked skeptical. One settler, a younger man Ethan didn't recognize, stood up angrily. "You expect us to just forget everything that's happened, to sit down with the people who killed our families?" "No one's asking you to forget," Ethan said quietly. "I haven't forgotten my wife and daughter. Never will. But I've learned the difference between remembering and letting memory turn you into something you're not." He stood up facing the young man. "Hate is easy. Hate asks nothing of you except to keep hating. Peace is hard. Peace asks you to see past your pain to the possibility of something better, to choose hope even when hope seems foolish." The young man's jaw worked. His hands clenched into fists. "They killed my sister. She was 12 years old." "I know," Ethan said gently. "And I'm sorry. Sorrier than words can say. But Catherine lost her sons. Thomas lost his boy. We've all lost people we loved. The question is, Do we keep losing them, or do we stop the cycle? The young man stood there, trembling, tears streaming down his face. Then slowly his fists unclenched. He sat down, his head in his hands. Catherine moved toward him carefully. When she reached him, she knelt down beside his seat. "My sons," she said softly. "One was 10, one was 12. Same age as your sister. I know your pain. Know it lives in your chest like stone. Heavy, cold." She placed her hand over her heart. But stone can be carved, can become something new, something beautiful. Pain does not have to stay pain forever. Can become strength, can become purpose. The young man looked at her, really looked at her, saw his own grief reflected in her eyes. "I don't know how to stop hating," he whispered. "You start small," Catherine said. "You wake up tomorrow and choose peace for one day. Then you wake up next day and choose again. One day at a time, one choice at a time." She stood and offered him her hand. After a long moment, he took it. The meeting continued for hours. Plans were made, committees formed. A formal peace council was established with representatives from both communities. Marshal Garrett would serve as mediator until trust was fully established. The first meeting would be in 1 month at a neutral location to be determined. Resources would be shared during the drought. Apache hunters would help settlers whose livestock had been decimated. Settlers would share medicine and tools. Children from both communities would be taught about each other's cultures, histories, perspectives. It wasn't perfect. Arguments broke out. Old suspicions surfaced. Some settlers left in anger, convinced this was all a mistake. A few Apache warriors muttered among themselves, clearly uncomfortable with so much proximity to their former enemies. But most stayed. Most tried. And that was enough for a beginning. As the sun began to set, people started to disperse. Families gathered their children. Warriors checked their weapons out of habit, then seemed to remember where they were, and relaxed slightly. Settlers and Apache who'd been mortal enemies that morning were now shaking hands, exchanging names, making tentative plans to meet again. Ethan stood near the well that had been rebuilt at the Carson place, watching it all unfold. The symbolism wasn't lost on him. Water, the thing that had started all of this, the thing that had brought Catherine and her warriors to his property, the thing that had made him choose mercy over vengeance. Catherine approached him, Gray Bear and Tommy following behind her. "It is good start," she said. "Better than I hoped." "It's something," Ethan agreed. "Whether it lasts, that's the question." "It will last if we make it last," Gray Bear said. "If we work every day to build it, to protect it." Tommy nodded. "I will work. We'll make sure young warriors understand this is new way. Better way." Anna and Jacob joined them along with Marshal Garrett. "The territorial governor wants to meet with representatives from both communities," the marshal said. "Next month in the capital. Wants to formalize the peace agreement, make it official." "Who will go?" Jacob asked. "I will," Catherine said immediately. "And I will," Ethan said. They looked at each other. Something passed between them. An understanding. A recognition that they were in this together now. That what had started with a bucket of water had become something larger than either of them. "We should all go," Anna said. "Show the governor that this isn't just two people making promises. That whole communities are behind this." "Agreed," Marshal Garrett said. "I'll make the arrangements." As darkness fell, lanterns were lit. Someone started a fire in the cleared area. Instead of leaving people gathered around it, settlers and Apaches sitting together, sharing food, telling stories. The children played together, their laughter cutting through years of tension and fear. Ethan found himself sitting next to Catherine, watching the flames dance. "I keep thinking this is a dream," he said quietly. "That I'll wake up and none of this will be real." "It is real," Catherine said. "Feel it." She took his hand and placed it over his heart. "Feel your heart beating. Feel warmth of fire. Hear laughter of children. That is real. That is what we built today." Her hand stayed on his for a moment longer than necessary. When she pulled away, Ethan felt the absence of her touch like a physical thing. "When this is over," he said, "when the peace is established and the councils are working and things are stable, what will you do?" Catherine was quiet for a long time. "I do not know. For so long I only think about survival, about keeping my people alive. Now maybe I can think about living, about what life looks like without war." She looked at him. "What will you do?" "Same thing I've been doing," Ethan said. "Working my ranch, drawing water from the well. But maybe not alone anymore. Maybe with friends, with people who understand what it costs to get here." "You will always have friends among my people," Catherine said. "Always have place at our fire. Always have our protection." "And you'll always have water at my well," Ethan said. "Always have shelter in my barn. Always have a place to rest when the world gets too heavy." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers. Around them, conversations continued. Plans were made. Friendships began to form. The impossible was becoming possible right before their eyes. 3 weeks later, Ethan stood in the territorial capitol building, wearing his best clothes and feeling distinctly out of place. Catherine stood beside him, dressed in a combination of traditional Apache clothing and settler garments that somehow worked together. Anna and Jacob were there, along with Thomas Webb Gray Bear Tommy, and a dozen others representing both communities. The governor was a stern-looking man named Richard Harrison. He listened as they presented their case, the evidence of Hale's conspiracy, the testimonies from both settlers and Apache, the plan for the Peace Council, and the resource-sharing agreement. When they finished, Governor Harrison sat back in his chair. "What you're proposing is unprecedented. The territorial government has never officially recognized an Apache Peace Council, never treated Native peoples as equal partners in governance." "Then maybe it is time you start," Catherine said. Her English had improved dramatically over the past weeks. "We are not going away. We are not disappearing. We are here. We have always been here. Question is whether you work with us or against us." The governor studied her for a long moment. "And if I refuse, if I tell you this is too radical, too risky?" "Then we do it anyway," Ethan said. "Without your blessing. The peace we've built doesn't need your permission. But it would be stronger with your support, with the backing of territorial law." Governor Harrison's expression was unreadable. Then slowly he smiled. "You've got courage, Marlowe. I'll give you that. Coming in here and telling a governor what he should do." He stood up and walked to the window looking out over the Capitol. "I've been governor for 6 years. In that time, I've seen more bloodshed between settlers and Apache than I care to count. I've sent soldiers. I've negotiated treaties that were broken before the ink dried. I've buried good men on both sides who died for land that didn't even belong to most of them." He turned back to face them. "What you've done in your territory is extraordinary. You've proven that peace is possible. That understanding can replace hatred. I'd be a fool not to support it." He extended his hand to Catherine. "On behalf of the territorial government, I formally recognize the Peace Council of the Arizona Territory. I pledge the full support and protection of territorial law to all agreements made between the settler and Apache communities. And I promise that any person who attempts to violate this peace will face the full weight of justice." Catherine took his hand. "We accept. And we promise to uphold this peace with honor and with action." The room erupted in applause. Ethan felt something release in his chest, something he'd been holding tight for 4 years. The weight of grief, the burden of loss. It didn't disappear, it would never disappear, but it transformed, became something he could carry without being crushed by it. After the ceremony, they gathered in a nearby restaurant. The owner had initially refused to serve Apache customers, but when Marshall Garrett explained who they were and what they'd accomplished, he'd relented. Now, settlers and Apache sat together at long tables, sharing meals and stories. Tommy sat next to a settler boy about his age, both of them awkwardly trying to communicate. By the end of the meal, they were laughing together, using hand gestures and broken phrases in each other's languages. Gray Bear was deep in conversation with Thomas Webb about ranching techniques and water conservation. The old warrior and the old settler found common ground in their years of experience and their shared exhaustion with violence. Anna was teaching some of the Apache women English phrases while they taught her words in their language. The laughter coming from their table was genuine and frequent. Ethan and Catherine sat slightly apart from the others, each lost in their own thoughts. "I keep thinking about that first day," Catherine said. "When I saw you standing there with that bucket of water, I thought you were fool, thought you would betray us." "I thought I was a fool too," Ethan admitted. "Thought I'd lost my mind, giving water to people who might kill me. But you did it anyway." "But I did it anyway," Ethan agreed. Catherine turned to face him fully. "Why? Why really not just because it was right? There is more. I see it in your eyes." Ethan took a breath. "Because I was tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of grieving. Tired of living in a world where hate made all the decisions. When I saw you and your warriors standing there desperate for water, I realized I had a choice. I could let hate decide for me, or I could decide for myself. So, I decided." He looked at her. "And I'm glad I did, because it brought me here, to this moment, to a world where peace might actually be possible." "It is more than possible," Catherine said. "It is happening. Because you chose to give water, because I chose to trust, because all of us chose to try." She reached into her pouch and pulled out something small. It was a ring, simple and made of silver with a small turquoise stone set in it. "My husband gave this to me," she said. "When we married, I have worn it since he died, kept it as reminder of what was lost." She held it up to the light. "But I think now it is time to remember differently. Time to remember that love existed, that good things are possible, that life continues even after loss." She took the ring off and pressed it into Ethan's hand. "I want you to have this. Not as promise, not as commitment, but as reminder that we are friends, that we built something impossible together, that we will continue to build it." Ethan looked at the ring in his palm. It was warm from her skin. "Catherine, I can't take this. It's too precious. It means too much to you." "That is why you must take it," she said. "Because it means much. Because what we have built means much. You taught me that loss does not have to be end. That pain can become purpose. This ring, it is symbol of that lesson." Ethan closed his hand around it. "I'll treasure it. Always." They sat together as the celebration continued around them. Two people who'd been brought together by desperation and choice, by circumstance and courage. Two people who'd looked at the world as it was and decided to make it into something better. The next morning, they began the journey back to their territory. The trip took 3 days, and by the time they arrived, word had already spread. The peace was official, recognized by the territorial government, protected by law. More settlers came to the Peace Council meetings. More Apache families felt safe enough to trade at settler towns. Children from both communities began to play together, to learn together, to see each other as something other than enemies. It wasn't perfect. There were setbacks, arguments, moments when old hatreds flared up and threatened to destroy everything they'd built. But each time that happened, people like Ethan and Catherine Anna and Jacob Tommy and Gray Bear stepped forward, reminded everyone what they were fighting for, why peace was worth the effort. Months passed, then a year. The peace held. The council meetings became routine. Families from both communities began to rely on each other. When drought hit, they shared resources. When sickness came, they shared medicine. When raiders from outside the territory tried to cause trouble, they defended each other. Ethan's ranch slowly came back to life. With help from Apache hunters and settler neighbors, he rebuilt his herds, fixed the barn properly, even planted crops again. The well continued to give water, and he continued to offer it freely to anyone who needed it. Catherine visited often, sometimes for council business, sometimes just to talk, to sit by the well and watch the sunset, to remember how far they'd come, and to plan how much further they could go. One evening, 2 years after that first day, they sat together as they often did. "Do you ever regret it?" Catherine asked, "choosing to help us that day?" Ethan thought about it, about everything that had happened, the danger, the difficulty, the constant work of maintaining peace. "No," he said finally. "Not for a second." "Good," Catherine said. "Because I do not regret trusting you. Do not regret choosing to see past my fear to possibility." She looked at the well. "Water is a simple thing, clear, pure, necessary for life, but it is also powerful. It carves canyons. It nourishes deserts. It transforms everything it touches." She turned to him. "That is what you did with one bucket of water. Transformed everything. Not just for my people or your people, for all of us." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring she'd given him. He'd kept it close, always a reminder of what they'd built together. "I think we transformed it together," he said. "You had to choose to trust. I had to choose to give. We both had to choose to believe peace was possible, even when everything said it wasn't." "Yes," Catherine agreed. "We both chose. And now others choose because we showed them how." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear overhead. Around them, the ranch was quiet. Peaceful. The kind of peace that comes not from absence of conflict, but from the presence of understanding. Years later, people would tell the story of the Arizona Territory peace. They would talk about the peace councils and the treaties and the laws that protected it. They would mention the politicians and the marshals and the leaders who made it official. But those who were there remembered the truth. That it started with something simpler. With a man who'd lost everything choosing to give water to people who needed it. With a woman who'd been betrayed so many times choosing to trust one more time. With two enemies looking at each other across a bucket of water and deciding that mercy was stronger than vengeance. The well never ran dry. Its water sustained both communities through droughts and hardships. Children from both peoples played around it, learning from a young age that what they shared was more important than what divided them. And every time someone drew water from that well, they remembered the day when one impossible choice changed everything. When compassion proved stronger than hate. When a rancher with nothing left to lose found something worth living for. The water was always free, just as Ethan had promised. And the peace it had birthed flowed outward like ripples in a pond, touching lives far beyond that small ranch in Arizona Territory, proving that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the smallest acts of kindness.